And can you mute everyone, Russell, please? Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Moore, and on behalf of the Center for Functional Nutrition, I welcome you to our Sunday morning coffee house. It's always wonderful to be here and to see all of your faces and to join into this community. And I just have a couple of housekeeping things this week for everybody that participated last Sunday in Terry Beck's coffee house. We will be sending out that information for his class this week. It just took a little bit of time to gather everything together, but you will get that invitation this week. And also to see past coffee houses, in the invitation that gets sent out, there is a link to our YouTube station, and all of the coffee houses are posted on our YouTube station. So you can go and have a look and a listen at those at any time you want. So Brian, I'm just going to hand the coffee house over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this beautiful Sunday. It's always great to look out and see familiar faces, some new faces, and we're so happy to join in and collaborate and create and connect with all of you. This is just such a wonderful part of what we get to do together. So I'm super psyched, as I always am, for these Sundays and for an amazing community that gets to gather together, and for the guests that we get to feature. For some of you, our featured guest may be familiar today. Carl was on our coffee house last year once, and I just have such a respect for Carl as a practitioner, but lucky for me, Carl has also become a friend over the past year or so, and he's an incredible human being. Carl was a Reiki Master and Teacher for 10 years before he received what he calls a gift called medical intuitive healing. This is something that I had never heard of, but it certainly was very intriguing when I found out, and I had to try it for myself. So earlier last year when Carl and I met, I was just so intrigued by him as a person and this gift that he had. So I did a session with him, and as my whole life story gets told, that 30 minutes with Carl will be a part of my story. I mean, it was certainly one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. He was able to know things and say things that simply were impossible to do on a human level. So that really caught my attention. We had Carl in the coffee house. It was an incredible session. A lot of people got value. And Carl sent me a text, I think on January 1st, to wish me a happy new year and to say that the gifts that he has, or the abilities that he had evolved, and that he had gotten some new information, and he was just so excited to share that. So of course we did another session, and it was incredible. And all I can say is that Carl, as a human being, is an exceptional human, and his ability to connect and deliver just from a human standpoint is profound. But he does have this gift of, he'll explain that to you, but I can tell you that the work that he does is absolutely profound. So without further ado, Carl, thank you so much for being here. And please, for those that don't know you, just give us a little background of who you are and how you've come to be here. You're still on mute. There you go.
There we go. Figured it out. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all. It's a good group here. But a little background about myself is that couple of things is that I became a Reiki Master Teacher in the year 2000, first part of 2000. And I had quite a lot of Reiki students and Reiki clients and so on for about 10 years, like Brian was saying. And then suddenly I had a Reiki session that was to be a remote Reiki session with one of the Minnesota Vikings football players. And we could just never get together for like the hands-on, Reiki session on a massage table kind of thing. So we had to do a remote thing. And when I did that for him, instead of doing like the usual Reiki symbols and all that stuff, that everything that goes into Reiki, as you might know, I was just like, suddenly, boom, I had no control over it. Suddenly I was inside his body like a microscopic surgeon. And I saw the torn cartilage of his knee and the infection, the scar tissue, everything that was wrong that had kept him off the bench or off the playing field, actually. Backstory is that his knee injury was so profound that he was not supposed to play for another 2 years. Well, I did this thing with him where I saw all this happening, and then the best way I can describe it is that like a hand from heaven, perhaps call it the hand of God or whatever you want to call it, came in and started fusing together the torn cartilage and dissipating the scar tissue and correcting the erratic blood flow and getting rid of the infection and all that stuff. And all that was just happening. And I was simply just witnessing it. So I called him the next day and I said, well, I did that thing for you. Let me know how it goes. I was trying to be really vague about it because I couldn't quite explain it. Long story short, it wasn't 2 years that he was on the bench. It was actually 2 weeks, and he was back in the game playing again. And he was telling me that all the physical, therapy staff, the physicians on the team and whatnot were all scratching their heads going, what did you do? What happened? You had 2 weeks and you're playing football again? So that was told to me as to be a medical intuitive gift. And that was what I've been doing. Actually, no Reiki at all after that. No more Reiki. It was all medical intuitive, where I was able to see inside, people's bodies basically and do healing. And then what happened, like Brian was saying, so that was going on for about 10 years. I'm doing medical intuitive for people. What Brian was saying, it's January, where I was just at a point where it sounds really kind of mundane and everyday kind of thing, but in my spare time, I like to work on cars. I'm what they would call in the South a shade tree mechanic, So I'm working on one of our cars, and I've been working on it for 2 or 3 months, and every time I worked on it, I thought, this time I got the answer. This time I know what to do. Oh, I can get it running this time, Well, it didn't run, and actually it still doesn't to this day, but that's not the point. The point is, in that particular day, I was so frustrated with it. I was just like totally out of ideas. I don't know what else to do. What the heck is going on? And I sat in the driver's seat of the car. I went and sat inside the car, and I was just like, oh, what's going on? What happened? And next thing I knew, to my way of thinking, to my belief, Jesus himself, think of him as a prophet, think of him as a savior, whatever we want, but Jesus himself, the guy, was sitting in the passenger seat with me. And he wasn't really speaking to me, but he was putting across these images and these messages. Number one thing that was most profound was that I was being shown that everything that we perceive, everything that we say, everything that we do, everything that we take part in, about 99% of that is not just illusion, like they would say, in a more new age realm, not just illusion, but about 99% of that is actually part of a network that was born out of one untruth. And this applies to everything that's an ailment, that's a situation, that's a struggle that we're having, where there has been this sort of a network that's been built up into a whole new reality of what's really untruths. And then this goes back to the DNA structure of every living thing, particularly humans. And so somewhere in the DNA of our existence, somewhere in the DNA of our existence, in our ancestry, whatever you're experiencing now as a medical situation, or even some kind of a lifestyle struggle, whatever it may be, but whatever you're experiencing now that's a difficulty for you, has its origins not just in a body thing or an emotional thing, a trauma that happened to you in childhood, but actually way, way back in your ancestry. Uh, and so then I was provided this information as a gift where I was able to see if someone contacted me, I would be able to see and pinpoint how many years ago roughly this thing occurred and how it was implanted in the DNA of that family line and goes on through to this person that I'm speaking to now. And the reason why it's realized in this person that I'm speaking to now is because they had gone to perhaps a doctor, some professional, and said, I think I have this situation, this pain, this ailment, and perhaps the doctor confirms it. And so from that point on, now you've given that spirit of infirmity, that spirit of difficulty, you've given that life now. You've given it life because you've claimed it. And from that point on, you're telling people, well, I have diabetes. Well, I have migraines. I'm prone to such and such. Uh, and lo and behold, what was revealed to me, I mean, I kind of knew this from studies before, but what was revealed to me in this thing with Jesus sitting next to me is that that's when you have claimed it. And it's no different than saying, for example, I have a Chevy Cruze that has given me a lot of problems mechanically and it won't run. It's no different from saying, I have diabetes. I have issues with my family. I have depression. When you say I have or I am, you've claimed it. This is your thing. It's your possession, just like the Chevy Cruze that won't run, or what have you. It makes no difference in the DNA makeup of things. And so what was given to me as part of this was that, and it became so profound to me, is that from that point on, I'd always had an appreciation for nature and so on, but this became really deep where, for example, right now I'm looking out my window and I see a pine tree, for example, and I know that pine tree has been there for about 30, 35 years, and I see it back as a seedling, and I'm looking at it right now, and not only do I have a deep appreciation for every seasons that it's been through here in Minnesota to get this far and live this long and be a pine tree, but I'm also very much aware of every single needle on that pine tree and what it took to be a needle on a pine tree. And it takes quite a lot. And that sort of thing where I can just look out at anything and all of a sudden I get the information of what it took to make that thing happen. That car in the parking lot, that lamppost. I mean, you name it. It's kind of interesting that way. So how that applies to people now in the healing practices that I do is that because of that, there's a really enhanced gift of prophecy, where me being a minister, being a Christian, I call it the heavens. I call it Father, Son, Holy Spirit. If that's not part of your belief system, that's fine. Give it a name, whatever you want to call it. But I think all of us can pretty well agree that there's something much higher than us. Something happens from above, from below, from outside of us somehow, maybe within us, whatever you want to call it. There's something higher that's always pretty well in charge and provides gifts, inspiration, So whatever you want to call it, I call it gifts from the heavens. So when I do a session for someone, they tell me what it is that's going on with them right now, and then boom, I'm in this prophetic mentality where I start spilling things out, and I have no control over what comes out of my mouth, but I start spilling out where this came from in their DNA and their ancestry. I explain what it looked like, how it was passed down, what it looked like in future subsequent generations, and how that's affecting them today and why it's affecting them today. And then I get some kind of a vision of what their DNA looks like, and it's different for everybody. I mean, it's always somehow it's spread out, and where I see like a "you are here" kind of an arrow sort of thing on the DNA spread out there, like this is the situation, this is the thing. And that spirit of that ailment is then in some way, and again, it's unique to everybody. I think, Brian, when you and I talked, wasn't that something like 3 guys like the FBI or something like that had come to the door of this spirit and taken it away, or in handcuffs or something like that, as I remember, the best of my recollection. But I mean, so spirit has a sense of humor about this sort of thing. It appears as a way that is unique to the person that I'm speaking to, apparently, in a way that they would find most memorable, is the way I can describe it. So anyway, I'm prophesying what's going on here, how it's taken away, and then how it's replaced by blessings of heaven, and the blessings are infinite. And in the process of doing that, then I'm aware of all the cells in that person's body being regenerated, rejuvenated, being given a new blueprint of existence, and the very cells in their body begin to renew, uh, become like they used to be when they were young, perhaps, or what have you. But get back into perfect balance is what it's really all about. And lo and behold, something happens while I'm talking to that person, and they feel it, they understand it, they get it. They're like, "Oh, that's so strange. You said something about a field of marigolds. How did you know that marigolds was my favorite flower?" Or what? I mean, things like that happen. And so um, this is how it gets really personal for whoever it is I'm talking to. And then there's that healing that occurs, and I'm just spilling out prophetic words. Basically, I'm just spilling out very quickly. And I think, Brian, you can probably attest to this with the session that I had with you. I just like blah, 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 I'm just like rattling off stuff very, very quickly. So it just happens. It just comes out, and there is a healing that occurs in that manner. And then you're left with this new sense, this new regeneration of your body, of who you are in your life. And that's basically what happens.
Yeah, that's thank you so much, Carl. I think that was a very simple and clear explanation, as simple and as clear as it can be, because it is such a huge thing that we're talking about. The other thing that I'd love for you to share, because I know it's been so impactful for me, is those I am phrases. So, ever since you and I did our first session, which was probably in like May or June, something like that of last year.
Yeah.
Part of my daily self-care and my meditation is I'm very conscious of my language, and certain language that you gave me that is now part of my daily routine. So maybe just take a minute or two to talk about how you set people forth after a session.
Right. And I'm glad you reminded me of that too, because that's probably the most important thing. Is that when I was doing medical intuitive work, for example, I always had information for people that was kind of like activities or things to change, perhaps about their diet, their lifestyle, supplements to take, and so on. So that's all about the physical. What this has been is that it's been more of a situation where I get information from people for pretty much as a blanket theory that be very conscious of what you're saying, and replace the words of "I have this ailment" or what have you. And I did a little computer thing there. Just a moment, sorry about that. But instead of getting out of the habit really of saying to people and saying out loud, "I have such and such," whatever. You stop saying that to the point where you stop thinking it, and instead you begin to say, "I used to have migraines. I used to suffer from depression. I used to such and such. And I learned a lot of stuff out of that experience. It doesn't really bother me anymore. Don't really have that anymore." You get into the place where you're actually speaking and the self-talk and so on. And it's just like the old, affirmation sort of a process. But on top of that is that now that you've had this experience, that we together have had this experience with something much greater that came in to both of us, really. Now that we've had that shared experience, it's important that you understand that the positive changes that occur for your life from that moment on are actually due to something much greater. And you can, whatever name you have for it, but you need to give acknowledgement to that thing that's greater. Give acknowledgement to God, give acknowledgement to Mother Earth, give acknowledgement to the Spirit, whatever you want to say. But give acknowledgement to that greater thing that provided these blessings to you as much as possible throughout the day. And you can say things like hallelujah. You can say things like, "Oh, I'm so glad that this is no longer a problem." You can say things like, "Thank you for the blessings, no matter what they look like. Everything is good, all is good," and so on and so forth. So it goes beyond the sense of affirmations. It's more of like a real, true acknowledgement of the memory of the conversation that we had and the experience that we shared together. So it's more of a tool of reflecting on that experience that we had and being openly speaking grateful for it.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Carl. Again, I can only say that my experiences with you have been an absolute game changer, and I practice those things on a daily basis, and they've made such a difference in my life, and they are a part of my tool belt for self-care. And I'm so very grateful to you, and of course to many others who are on this coffee house with us. So without further ado, let's open it up for comments and questions. I've got Russell up front. Yes, go for it.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Russell.
So two questions that you if you could speak to. So could you clarify a little bit more? I have this sense when you're talking about the damage, the damage that was done to an individual 2, 3, 10 generations ago, and then it's somehow in the DNA, and that person is struggling until they can either identify that, access that, let it go. Could you speak to that a little more? And is it physically in the DNA? And then, in the unraveling, and I love the word you use, regeneration. I mean, that's my whole learning of the last 40 years has been to try to facilitate cellular regeneration. So that's kind of the first thing. And then the second thing is the importance of language, going way beyond affirmations. Like you're saying, you create your reality by how you speak it. So
That's right. Yeah. And so what happens in these sessions, to hopefully answer your question, is that when I see how this began in the ancestry somewhere, and I see how it didn't necessarily have to be an issue for each subsequent generation. It could have skipped a generation or 2 or 4 or 10 or whatever, but it comes to life because the person that it affects has given it life, in a sense, by having a little bit of an experience and then perhaps overreacting or wanting to seek out help for it or something to that effect. And, some people, some generations are predisposed to just be faced with a problem and just overcome it. And other people will be faced with a problem and seek out some way to explain it or label it, or give it some kind of assistance, really. And so when that happens, then that begins to give that spirit of that ailment, that gives it life. And so in that generation's, that siblings' life experience, they have that situation because they say that they have that situation. They've given that spirit of that ailment a life. They've breathed life into it. But it still stays in the DNA. And so what happens is that when you get to, by the time you get to your generation, your experience, and even though you may have siblings that don't have the same ailment or situation that you do, they've just never really entertained it enough. Whatever. When it comes down to you and your particular situation, when you've been told that now this has been taken out of your DNA and it's been described to you how it's been done and what it looks like that's unique to you, now you actually in your mind have a new blueprint of really what to say to understand that this is no longer your reality. And I have to go back to that time when Jesus was sitting next to me in the car, and he was explaining how like 99% of everything that we perceive and even take part in is born out of one untruth. And it's become, in a way of backing up that one untruth, it's become this huge network that we think is reality. So, boom, that one untruth about your physicality, your lifestyle, your situation, that one untruth has been cleared out. And now there's the true reality of blessings, balance that is implanted in you. And when you simply acknowledge that, then that builds up this armor around you, if you will, a protection, a shield, a force field, whatever, all around you. The more you speak it, the more it becomes this force field for the 99% of, untruths in the world to not have an effect on you, not be able to penetrate and make it your reality.
Yeah, that was a great question, Russell, and even a more in-depth answer, Carl. That was awesome. TJ, I know you had a question. Go for it, please.
I had to unmute myself. Thank you so much for recognizing me, Brian. I'm really excited to be here and hear this today. This is the kind of thing that really just floats my boat. So can I just say, Carl, can I understand that what you're saying, and I wrote it down so I could get this right, is that after a session with you, this goes away, and then we, in essence, have to do the work in order, by speaking the language and thinking properly, etc., in order not to invite this back into our life again.
Right.
And then, so I've just come out of a surgery and I now have another issue that has approached, within the past couple of days. So I definitely would love to have a session with you. The number that was provided, is that a number that I can call to get?
Right. That's my cell number. Yeah, that's directly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to do that. Thank you. So can you answer that for me then? That's the truth and what I'm thinking that you're saying?
Yeah, and that is exactly along that same line too. For me, I mean, there's scientific evidence, scientific practice to this sort of thing as well that backs it up. For me, I look at it as it's a spiritual blessing where to my way of thinking, the gifts of heaven have been opened up and brought into the very cellular structure of you. And every cell, therefore, in your body is affected and filled with these gifts of heaven.
Okay, and so to follow that up, does that, of course, now I know that Russell and Megan and you understand my progeny and the things that I, deal with as far as my children and my grandchildren. So my question is, does this have any effect then for the children? Does this change anything for them in any way at all? And your grandchildren and
Yes,
down
especially for future generations. Yeah, especially for future generations, because this has been removed now from your DNA. And so from that time on, this is no longer an issue. As far as the children that are already living,
yeah,
right. There is an aspect of that then being transferred on a spiritual level to them too, that they are not quite so predisposed to such a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's good, of course, to have that direct one-on-one communication experience with them individually. However, just by you having them in your mind, really a lot of best way to kind of sum this up of how it affects other people in your world is that because you are the one that came with some sense of humility because you asked for this to be corrected, because you came with that sense of humility, that's the most powerful thing to receive a blessing of any kind. And then along with that asking out of humility, you also have a great sense of love in your heart for all the people in your world, your children, everybody in your world that you love. And because of that love, that's an enormous power for you. And so now that you've received these blessings, that love acts as like a broadcast station, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. That love that you feel for your family, that radiates these blessings out to them as well at the same time.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate you answering those questions.
Yeah, it was a great question, TJ. And I can tell you one of the things that I got from Carl that I use every day is I actually say, I am love. And I just say it over and over and over because that's not just about me. It's about how I'm received in the world. And I want that. So it's,
I've always felt that from you anyway, Brian.
Thank you so much, TJ. I try. There's a great question here from Beth Wofford, and then Catherine, I'll get to you. And I'm just going to answer it for you, Carl, because I know the answer. Okay. So the question from Beth is, is this useful for people who may not have a disease or, some kind of medical condition? And the answer is yes. Part of the reason why I connected with Carl was simply because I'm always looking to, better myself so that I can be better for others. And absolutely, if you're the healthiest, most empowered person on the planet, you would still get a lot of benefit from connecting with Carl because, again, there's so much more than beyond just what we know as a human being. And Carl gets to tap into all that. So it's a great question, Beth, and thank you for it. Catherine Taylor, go for it.
Well, I want to speak to the integrity of your work, Carl, because we've worked all through the years on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But one of the most profound sessions I did with you was that weekend that I was going through Avery's last 3 days. And remember, I called you and I came into the phone call with the desire to find more specificity about what was going on with him so that I could begin to, target that. And instead, what came through you is I don't get anything. I can't see anything. And in the 3D world, usually a person would walk away and think, well, shit, that didn't work. But what happened was that plummeted me away from being in the fixing mode with Avery to compassionate detachment. So that I spent those next 48 hours giving up control, giving Avery complete, power to decide what he needed to do. My human self was still holding on to, hopefully he was going to stay. But I had prepared myself so that when I walked into that vet's office and he said, no, he's only got a couple days, and within 2 hours we put him down, I was prepared for that in a very gracious way, that I could switch out of my grief and just escort my beloved dog to the other side. So I think that really speaks to the integrity, that when it wasn't right to give me those answers, you stayed true to what came through and how powerful that ended up being for me. So I love your work, and I'm just so glad that you're part of my life.
Thank you, Catherine. Likewise, I'm so glad to be in your life as well. You are in mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for sharing that. I know that was a very big thing. Thank you,
Not easy
Catherine.
to talk about that, I know.
Yeah.
It's not easy to speak that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. I had a question here from Cameron, Carl, who mentioned that this is sounding like epigenetics. Is that something that you would refer to or speak to? I see some shrugging.
I've never heard that word in my life. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think Russell has a comment.
let me speak to that. So epigenetics means that healing happens as a consequence of the environment. And specific to functional medicine, epigenetics means that the cellular environment determines the outcome of the cell. And so, Cameron, what I got this morning, really for the first time, what Carl is describing is the environment that we produce inside of our body unawares a lot of time, unconsciously a lot of time. So that definitely is part of the epigenetics equation. In fact, what I'm hearing this morning is for a lot of people who do not heal, they're doing a lot of the physical things or all of the physical things, but they're stuck. Then this type of work, this type of intervention where you can identify the untruth that you're holding on to and let it go. And then as Brian is learning, and I'm learning, to then speak a new reality about your life. I am this, I am that. And that creates the environment psychologically, spiritually, and physically for healing. And that is all epigenetics.
Okay. Yeah. Well, to answer your question, Cameron, yeah, that's pretty much what you said. That word. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
It's all about teamwork here on the Sunday morning coffee house. Thank you, Russell.
It is
Let's see here. Megan, were you raising your hand?
Well, yeah, I think Carolyn had a question. I can
Okay.
go after Carolyn.
Carolyn, go for it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Megan. Carl, this is just such profound work. Thank you so much for being here today. I so resonate with it. A part of it reminds me of a course I took several years ago called biodecoding. And it was about digging into the ancestry and how when we carry over stuff into into this life, part of that is from an ancestral point. So I love that you're doing this kind of work to assist people. And I know that is just such the work in the DNA and the ancestry is so profound. You know, I don't think anyone realizes how profound it is until you really start digging into it. And I know for myself, I've done a tremendous amount of like emotional, energetic clearing from my ancestry. I definitely will be reaching out to you because I have something I've been working on and off for a decade. And I know it's something carried over, and I've peeled back a lot of layers, but it's reared its head again. So I'm definitely going to reach out and see what we can discover. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
I love that so much. I mean, just looking at and seeing the powerhouse people, you know, Carl, you'll get to know Carolyn, and she and Jana, her partner next to her, are just incredible light leaders in the world. So my heart gets so big when I see people like you getting connected, and TJ, and just so amazing. Anyone else with a comment or a question before I get to Megan?
Oh,
All right, Megan, the floor is yours. Go for it.
all right. Yeah, it's the power of the spoken word that is intriguing me at the moment, Carl. And that is, I've been thinking of it within the context of this coffee house, for instance, and of us as a global community, and how effective the energetics and the words that we're speaking, for instance, this morning, have an effect on the, I don't know if this is even a word, but the global DNA, the big DNA.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering if you had a comment on that.
Yeah, and I completely believe that is what's happening, because just as what we perceive as so much of our reality was actually born out of one lie that just got justified and backed up all over the time, you know, all over time, so does speaking the truth, which actually has a lot more power behind it. Speaking the truth, speaking true things, speaking words of healing, of progress, of whatever, anything positive. Speaking words of positivity also has a divine network sort of a thing that goes on and starts to blanket the entire world. So one thing that was given to me in that image with Jesus in the passenger seat was that we are actually at a point in our human history where it's become very crucial, where the people who are positive have to jump off the fence and be in the positive field, and the people who are negative have to jump off the fence and be in the negative field. It's become a point in our human history where the positive people, the negative people, the people who do good, the people who do harm. This is what the Bible would have said, separating the wheat from the chaff. But I mean, it's become where anybody who is kind of on the fence about their beliefs or what they want to do in the world, perhaps, I mean, and this would apply to perhaps even say clergymen who are in the church and thought of as really high up, but they're also on the side of the fence that does harm. There's, deception, betrayal, you know what I mean? Things like that. They have to jump off the fence. Are you going to be totally on the good side or totally on the bad side? And all of that has to do with the words that we say, because each one of us has also in our DNA, every single human being. Doesn't matter your faith, doesn't matter your lack of faith, doesn't matter anything. But every single one of us as a human being has a gift and thus a responsibility to maintain something in the world that is productive, that is good. So this can only come about by our words. It is my personal belief, and I've seen this in action, that's why I believe it, is that the thing that I call the dark side, it's more like earthbound spirits. It's things that don't necessarily come from heaven. It's whatever you want to say, but the things that do harm, the spirits that are all around us in the world that do harm, they don't read our thoughts. They'll put thoughts into our minds that make us say things, but they can't read our thoughts. Only the one and only Almighty, the source, the God of everything, can read our thoughts. So the key is that if we actually speak things that have nothing to do with the dark side, that have nothing to do with those earthbound spirits that want to do harm, if we continue to speak things that have really no room for those things to even exist, that's maybe another way to look at it, is that on a spiritual level, if you're speaking things that are all about what's good, what's productive, what's healing, what helps, and you're not speaking anything that relates to these dark little entities that want to, prove you right whenever you say something wrong, say something bad, as long as you keep on that good path with your speaking, you've thus made less and less room for the darkness.
I love it. Thank you for the
Yes,
great
thank
question,
you, Carl.
Megan. And thank you, Carl. This was, just a very deep and profound session, connection, creation that we all did together. And, I can only say personally that the work that I've done with you and the connection and relationship that we've built has had a profound impact on my life, as with, others that I see out in the crowd here. So together, really, I think the best thing that we can all do is to take our own self-care the most serious thing that we could possibly do in our life. Just that's the number one thing, our own self-care, and to find the things and the people and places that nourish us best and create a tool belt that has us going out into the world as our best selves, because that's where community happens. That's where shift happens. Positive things cannot happen from one person, but from incredible groups of people that are moving together. So thank you, Carl, for being a great part of that. And thank you, everyone else, for being a huge part of this together. And speaking of tool belts, we would love to share with you a good news today about some nifty ways for us all to grow plants. And I'll kind of leave it there, but I think it ties into what I was just saying. So for any of you with a green thumb, this should be a lot of fun. So just give me a second. Russell, you got to make me host, please.
I did earlier, Brent.
It's not letting me share my screen.
All right, hold up. All right, I just made you host.
Yeah, we're good now. All right, everyone seeing my screen?
Yes. Brian, make sure you click to do theater mode. One more.
That was
All
fun.
righty.
Really cool.
Well, that was fun. I just loved how useful that video was. And I really, when I saw it, for me, the message I got was like, the same way we're using these tips for planting seeds and taking care of plants, it's the same with us in our language. So the language matters. It's the seeds to a great life and to living a healthy life. So thank you everyone for joining, creating, collaborating, connecting. We'll see you all next Sunday. Have a wonderful week. Give someone a hug, share some joy, share some love. See y'all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Brian.
Wonderful,
Thank you very
wonderful
much.
week,
Thank you.
everyone.
for
Thank you,
presentation on
Carl.
that video.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Carl.
everyone.
Thanks, Carl.
Carl.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Carl.
God bless
Thanks,
you.
Russell.
Carl.
Thanks.